The challenge of governance is to see how we can leverage what is on the ground and convert this to wealth for the people.
Russia, China are gaining entry into Africa, and it would appear that some Western countries are losing out.
You're working as an expatriate worker, then you're paid in your currency. But then if you must spend those money, you need to convert those money to the local currency to spend.
When we address this exchange rate volatility, we will see definitely cost of goods and services will come down.
From a security point of view, we should employ the technology to ensure that we can track individuals and goods within the continent.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
So, what a way to start the show this morning. This is your award-winning program, Early Exchange, where we shape policy and advance development with our conversation. And also, this is where the big story lives. And I remain your favorite anchor, Femi Adele is my name. Today's going to be a special one. You know, it's Wednesday. And on Wednesday, we'll do a special series on sustainable development goals. There are about 17 of these goals, you know, carved out by the United Nations in the year 2015. To eradicate poverty and the issue of inequality as far as the global world is concerned. Today we'll be looking at that, and specifically we'll be looking at how to incorporate these principles, especially when it comes to the principle related to the environment, to the social value and governance, how that can be incorporated into the academic curriculum. Today is looking like a conversation that has to be on the educational sector. Don't forget you can be part of this conversation. All you just have to do is to join us on all our social media platforms, on Facebook, on X, YouTube. Just search for at Soup News TV. There you find us using the hashtag Early Exchange. And now, let's begin our business of shaping policy for today by bringing in our guests. We've been joined virtually by Dr. Peter Ogudoro, who is an international award-winning educational researcher and leader of the international award-winning Nigerian Teachers community. He's an expert when it comes to issues related to education. Dr. Peter Ogudoro, glad to have you join us on Early Exchange this morning. Good to see you again.
Yes, it's my pleasure to join you on the show, Femi. Good morning.
Morning. All right, let's provide a background for our viewers to understand the context to this conversation. We're talking about sustainable development goals, which you have about 17 of them. But today we're looking at how this could be incorporated into the academic curriculum, talking about, you know, the principles related to ESG. When you talk about ESG, you're referring to environment, social, and governance framework. There are several countries that have adopted this. You have a good reference that has to do with Germany, China, and the rest of them. Give us a picture of what Nigeria is doing as regards the adoption of these principles to academic curriculum. What level are we? How are we catching up with this trend? And what will be the impact if this is done successfully in Nigeria?
Well, we have been talking about sustainable development goals for ages now, and in government circles, through seminars, workshops, and conferences, the matter has been put on the agenda, and of course, it's been discussed. The only worry some of us have is that we have a way as a people of just doing the talking without doing the work, and that's where we are lagging behind the rest of the world, especially given the fact that we are not bringing to the table major stakeholders who can help us to achieve what we are desiring to accomplish in this respect. And those major stakeholders are the teachers, the parents, and of course the children who are the center of this matter when you're talking about sustainable development. They are the ones who will lead us tomorrow. And if we don't design and implement a curriculum that helps them to learn and understand what we are talking about, then we are only doing the talking and we are not doing the work. So yes, we are doing some talking, but I haven't seen much of any significant change in our curriculum and, of course, teaching practice that will enable us to get our children to understand that truly The future belongs to them, and we all have to behave in certain ways to be able to guarantee a future that would make our environment give us what it is supposed to give us. There's so much of degradation going on across the world. Africa, we must put it on record, is not doing as poorly as we might imagine, in spite of our poor economies with respect to environmental degradation, because we are not yet very industrialized. But things are moving in that direction. We can see big factories, springing up across the continent. Dangote has built a refinery that is in its own class about the biggest in the world. And so we have to start making a deliberate effort to ensure that our children are learning how to behave responsibly so that our tomorrow can be guaranteed.
All right. Now there's this new school of thought as regards the implementation of these goals. There are stakeholders who are of the opinion that if the principles related to these goals are integrated into the academic curriculum, maybe it's going to make some level of impact. And now, as an expert, as a teacher and an expert in that sector, what difference will it make if these goals are turned into subjects in primary school, in secondary school, in tertiary institutions, and perhaps if this adoption is made officially, will it make any impact? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Of course, we know that education has been proven beyond the reasonable doubt to be the bedrock of development of any kind. And so if we're able to successfully incorporate these principles into our curriculum and don't stop there, also train the teachers and the school leaders to provide an enabling environment supported by relevant government agencies that will make our children learn these things early and behave accordingly in every sphere of human endeavor, then you can be sure that Nigeria will get up and begin to fly. But at the moment, as I signposted earlier, it doesn't look like we are investing adequately to ensure that the curriculum that will enable our children learn these things and behave accordingly. The curricula are in place and are being taught by well-groomed and trained teachers. Unfortunately for us, the quality of teaching practice in our country at the moment is subpar. And the reason it's subpar is the fact that the people who are also teaching in our faculties of education, the professors, are also not being helped to go to places where they can learn from their mates, from their colleagues, and then come back to help the next generation of teachers to learn how to teach properly. So until we start adopting the right policies, and again, making sure that the right people are actually the people on the corridors of power. Politicians who, for example, in parliament, populate the committees that handle education matters, then we must also ensure that they're not just regular politicians, they are not just businessmen, they are people who understand education issues and who help us to provide appropriate regulatory framework that will ensure that we have a good template to work with. But after we have got the template, we must also ensure that we train people properly and provide them the incentives to stay in the education space and make things happen. As we speak, most of the best brains in our country don't seem to find a home in the education space because we don't pay teachers well, and teachers don't have robust social status. And so, so long as those issues remain unattended to, for that long we will continue to merely do the talking and discover that we are not really putting the horse before the cart. What we are doing at the moment is probably the opposite of what we should be doing, and that is very worrisome to us. But I think that people like you who find a good heart to put this on the table for people like us to discuss it, you should continue to do what you're doing. With time, Your voices will resonate, and those on the corridors of power will hear us, and of course, join us to make things happen properly.
All right, what's a way to complement what we're doing? Our role is to shape policy, and which is why we're having this conversation. And now for us to be able to, situate this conversation, I would like us to paint a scenario. I like the fact that you're a researcher. Now, let's paint a scenario or create a scenario where you're being consulted to provide a framework, perhaps for the federal government or the state government, on how to adapt this into academic curriculum. What will be your suggestions? What will be the starting point? And I want you to be very specific here. Whose responsibility will it be to champion this cause of these integrating these principles into academic curriculum? Now, I'm putting you on the spot now as the researcher, as the consultant now, to provide a framework. If we need to adapt these principles, these goals to academic curriculum, what will be the starting point, and whose responsibility will it be to take up this initiative?
Yeah, when it comes to getting education to play its proper role in society, you have to start from the highest level of leadership. The president must be directly involved. He has to show, demonstrate that this is a very important policy element. And once you get the president to demonstrate understanding and importance of this element, then he has to work with the Minister of Education, who leads all of us in the education industry in terms of policy provisions and providing an appropriate regulatory environment. So we need to, after we have got the minister on board properly, ensure that all the people who advise people like him, including those in parliament, who also make the relevant laws, especially those who populate the standing committees of the House of Representatives and Senate, we need to get them on board. We need to educate them as to the importance of what we're discussing, and more fundamentally, the indispensable place of education in moving any country, and more specifically our own country, forward, and then get them to see how important it is that we don't just continue to behave irresponsibly, and recognize that tomorrow will come, and that it is what we do today and the provisions we put in place that we guarantee that tomorrow in the way that all of us would desire to see it. So if we provide that awareness, create that awareness, and train the people who will make the policies, we shouldn't assume that they already know. They don't know. If you do my kind of work, you will know that most of the people who have given important responsibilities in the education space actually know nothing about education. They can't define learning. They can't even define education. There is so much of people thinking that education begins and ends with the school certificate you get when you finish secondary school, the degree you obtain when you go to university. But education can happen without even people having certificate, and the people might have certificate and the education hasn't happened. So if we provide that level of awareness, and then we should let it percolate down the line to the level where we have education inspectors who also need to be properly trained, so that they can, after we have put the right things in place in terms of the policy framework, work with relevant stakeholders, the teachers, the school leaders, training them, supervising them, insisting that they do the proper things, and getting our children very early, in the process, to understand that this future we are talking about belongs to them, and they have a responsibility to ensure that they sit down in the classrooms and learn. And we should also teach them in ways that they would truly learn. There's so much of rote learning going on in our society, which is not helping matters. And so as we are putting things on paper, we should also be developing appropriate mechanisms for us to teach children in ways that they can remember. Most of the time, what we do is to stand in the classrooms as teachers and preach to children, which doesn't make them understand what we're talking about. So we need to take these children into open spaces where they relate with the environment. If you're as familiar as I am regarding what we are finding, especially in the metropolis, in places like Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Kano, Kaduna, Enugu, Ibadan, children don't seem to have the privilege, the opportunity to learn in open spaces. Much of what we are doing as educators is being done in enclosed environments that you call classrooms. And so children are not given adequate opportunity to relate with the larger environment so that they can understand what we're talking about. If you have been privileged to go to the Scandinavian region, you discover that they don't use more than about 25% of the spaces available to them, to build classrooms. Most of their spaces are open spaces, so that children are on a daily basis relating with their physical environment, so that they can see the need to protect it and to relate with it in very responsible manners. That's not what we're finding. And unfortunately for us, the children who are being trained in Abuja, Lagos, Port Harcourt, Kaduna, Kano, and Ibadan, and Enugu are actually the children who, from the way we have behaved as a people and we have run our country, they are going to be the ones who will become the political leaders of tomorrow, the economic leaders of tomorrow. And since we are not exposing them early to the challenges that we are currently experiencing in the environment, they are likely to behave very responsibly when they become the political, economic, and social leaders. So I think that whatever you are designing must be holistic and don't leave out any stakeholder, starting from the number one citizen of our country, the president, who must, from time to time, talk about the importance that we should place on our environment and on our future. And of course, by the way he and his colleagues in the political space are behaving, they must demonstrate that they are interested in not only making us flourish today, but also ensuring that by the policies and behaviors that we are seeing them, demonstrate, that they are also making adequate provisions for our tomorrow.
All right, what an interesting narrative there, Dr. Ogudoro. Now, you're aware of this adage that says that the only constant thing in life is change. And when it comes to change, there are two general reactions. People could either adopt or resist change. Now, let's look at this scenario where the adoption of this principle is going to be done. Do you foresee any form of resistance, maybe from stakeholders, from teachers, from students, from even school owners, when it comes to the adoption or the integration of these principles to academic curriculum? Do you foresee any challenge or any resistance? Because when it comes to change, people will either adopt change or resist it. What do you think?
Well, it's ingrained in human nature for us to resist things we do not understand. And we have also seen that over the years in our country. The major reason why stakeholders on anything you are discussing in our country tend to say no to what you want to bring on board as a change, as a new way to do things, is because most of the time we don't involve them in the planning process, in the decision-making process. And so resistance should be anticipated if we do not make a deliberate effort to implement change properly. And we know that the best way to implement change is to ensure that you identify everyone, every individual, every group, every community, every level of government that will lose something as a result of what you're trying to do, or will gain something as a result of what you're trying to do. If people understand that at the end of the day, it will be a net gain for them, then you can trust them to support what you're trying to do. But sometimes, even when it's going to be a net gain for them, because you have not carried them along in the decision-making process, they don't understand what you're doing. So their natural tendency is to say no to what you're trying to do, even when it's going to serve their best interest. So the way to go, if you ask me, is to implement change properly, get people on board very early in the process, create the right awareness, bring them into discussions that will help them to make their contributions, tell you what the problems would be when you start doing what you're trying to do, and then don't discountenance their fears. Place those fears as legitimate issues that need to be understood and addressed. And once their fears have been understood and addressed, you can be sure that they will be happy to even go the extra mile, do much more than you are expecting them to do, to ensure that what you want to do, gets done properly, because at the end of the day, it serves everybody's best interest. But merely, assuming that because something is going to serve my best interest and you haven't consulted me, that I'm going to, support you, is the wrong way to think. So my friend Femi, the way to move forward is to anticipate resistance to change that will come if we don't involve people in the decision-making process. But then trust that once we follow the appropriate steps in trying to implement change, by first identifying all the people whose interests are at stake and ensuring that their ideas go into the formulation of appropriate methodology for moving all of us forward in this direction, then you can be very sure that that resistance that we always see in our country will not happen, especially in this respect.
Now, as a follow-up to that, to avoid that level of resistance you've painted now, or the level of mixed reactions or negative reactions that could trail this kind of change or this kind of innovation, what kind of, stakeholders engagement, kind of public awareness are you expecting? Because people resist change, perhaps because they don't have proper understanding, like you've said, and also the fact that they are not so sure their interest is being factored into the initiative. Now, so what kind of public awareness or kind of stakeholders engagement will change this negative impression or these negative reaction as regards this integration?
Well, for a start, professionals like you who understand how to use language and how to communicate should be incorporated into the process of trying to get everyone on board. And so some of the things we can do would be to continue to put this matter on the table the way we are doing it this morning. Let's continue to have, conversations on radio and television. Now that we have, new media, let's use YouTube platforms, to produce and disseminate information by way of documentaries and conversations like talk shows that give as many people as possible opportunity to contribute to the conversation. And of course, we should do features, that do extensive reporting on the issues at stake, sharing data, calling attention to what we will lose if we don't behave properly, if we don't make these provisions that we're advocating as we have this conversation. We should also have town halls, so that we can, town hall meetings, so that we can have conversations that involve those who may not be privileged to have access to the kind of mass media some of us use regularly. Again, we know that language can also be a barrier. For us to be, having this kind of conversation, we should be able to speak English. But you see, we don't all have to speak English language to make useful contribution to how our society is governed. So, because it's not only the people who speak English that can help our society to move forward. There are people in our rural communities who are custodians of those physical environments at those levels who must be involved in this conversation. So we should carry the battle, to as far as and deep into our rural communities as possible. Have town hall meetings, get them to realize that they have to behave in certain ways if our environment is going to be, protected and nourished in ways that will guarantee the future all of us would like to see. And so those town hall meetings will help. And they must be led by people who are respected in our various communities. The politicians should attend. Experts, researchers like us should be given the opportunity to shepherd it, to superintend it, to provide guidance on how to make it happen properly. And we should continue to have, talk shows and go to schools, go to even marketplaces and get involved in conversations that involve parents, using platforms like PTAs, so that we can have dialogues with them. School leaders, our principal stakeholders in this process, we must not make the mistake of thinking that we can ignore them and get the results we're looking for, because they determine whether information, can be passed successfully through the school system. It's whatever they allow that can get aired in our classrooms, because they determine what teachers can teach ultimately. So anything they don't support doesn't find space in our classrooms. And so we need to be as pervasive as possible in terms of the channels we have to employ to be able to get these messages across and engage all the publics who need to make contributions towards the accomplishment of what we're looking for. And so, having said that, it may not be a bad idea to engage the services of professional public relations practitioners who can help you to identify appropriate stakeholders and design communication systems which you can implement to ensure that you are accommodating all shares of opinions and then sift them in ways that will leave you ultimately with what truly matters, which we can then fund adequately to have them implemented. That way, we'll be doing the right thing. But if we just stop at merely writing things on paper and calling them policies and then we put them on the shelf in government ministries, I tell you, we will be behaving irresponsibly if we stop there. But if we take the battle to the field and ensure that we're having these conversations using a variety of techniques, as I have, some of which I have suggested in this conversation, I think we'll be doing the right thing. And even rallies would be useful. Even when we do, festivals, we can, have a way of incorporating some of these ideas into as elements of whatever we are doing. Even when we are doing entertainment, our filmmakers should come on board so that as they make their movies, they will be accommodating ideas that promote, the sustainability of environment. And then we should also give them incentives. We should pay them for their services. We should put in adverts, in indirect ways that will and make the filmmakers write better scripts that reflect the kind of society we want to see, today and tomorrow. And then give them incentives to be able to do that. Because what I hear these days, why filmmakers do the wrong thing most of the time, is the fact that they think that what sells is just the nudity that we see on the tube, most of the time. So we should give them incentives by way of paying for some of the things they're producing, so that they can put out the right messages and not because they are searching for quick fixes and ways to make money, and then they sell us what people want to see, which may be destructive to society. So Femi, let's be comprehensive as much as possible. Use a multitude of media and techniques to get these messages out, and we'll discover that Nigerians are not irresponsible people. We listen when we discover that things are being done in our best interest.
All right, what an interesting submission there. We're not done yet. We're still discussing sustainable development goals and how to integrate that into academic curriculum. Now, let's look at some of the challenges that might likely come when it comes to the implementation of this principle or this initiative, if that will see the light of the day in Nigeria. Let's talk about the training methodologies. Let's talk about the training format, and also the materials that will be needed to achieve this kind of integration. Talking about textbooks, talking about, the right teaching materials that will be needed as regards integrating these principles into academic curriculum. What kind of teaching methodology or techniques or materials will you advocate to make this initiative successful?
Well, we need to, in terms of teaching methodology, we need to move very quickly towards making inquiry-based learning pervasive in our education system. That's not what we find now. We are predominantly invested in the use of lecture approach to getting our children to learn, and that has been, found to be very ineffective in virtually every society where research has been done on it. But if you get children to get involved in inquiry, then give them projects, let them learn by handling projects, let them learn by, asking questions, give them design many research projects, small ones at their levels, depending on their ages, and across the entire education system, from kindergarten to up to higher education level. Let children get involved in determining what the problems are and finding solutions to those problems through activity-based, platforms and learning approaches. And teachers, to be able to use this, must go back to the drawing board, must go back to classrooms and first be trained on how to deploy, discussion-based learning approaches, and of course, inquiry-based learning approaches, so that they know that the teacher today is a facilitator in the classroom. He is not the expert all the time, because sometimes the children we are teaching know some of these things better than us. The reason why they still need us is because we have experience that they have not had, and we have wisdom they have not, spent significant number of years on earth to acquire. It doesn't mean that we have piece of knowledge to a level that is always larger than what they know on the specific subject matter that we may be presenting to them in the classroom. So we need to adopt methodologies that engage children fully. They are in all their faculties. They should be able to speak. They should be able to see. They should be able to feel. They should be able to listen. What we are doing currently is to get them to just listen, and that's not an effective way to learn. So you need to engage all the faculties of the learner, so that when you are done teaching, the learner would have learned. In our current circumstance, that's not where we are. And so, if you ask me, that will be the most important focus of our, education policymakers, and then the school leaders who own the schools. When we say who own the schools, we also include the education inspectors who come from ministries of education, because most of the time they are acting on behalf of the school owner, called government, for those who are operating in the public education space. So that's the way to go. Our current methodology for teaching is far behind time, is probably up to 100 years behind time. We need to stop doing the talking as teachers and do more facilitation, and get our children to take over, providing them guidance so that they can learn how to design projects and have those projects reveal what the problems are, and in the process discover the solutions to the problems that confront us now. And if this is going to happen, the professors must lead the way, by way of also returning to classrooms to go and learn themselves. And much of that learning is not available in our country at the moment. We can sponsor them to go to, for example, the Scandinavian region, where people have developed appropriate ways to teach so that children can learn. That way, even if it's just 1 week that we can afford, let us send them to the Scandinavian region, to places like Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. They will come back here and train our teachers better. And then when the teachers know how to deploy discussion methods, learn how to deploy inquiry-based methods, project-based methods, they will be able to help the children to design projects that will help them to understand how important it is that they work with other children. They respect principles of accountability, responsibility. They recognize what leadership truly means, that a leader is there to serve and not just to, lord things over other members of the group. And that, of course, what makes you a leader is not that you are always the one, doing all the talking. You are just there as a facilitator. So it requires a new mindset, and that new mindset will not come to us by chance. And we must orchestrate it through getting the trainers, training the trainers first and foremost, and then providing enabling environment. Even the way our classrooms are designed now also need to be rewarded. The sitting arrangement in the classrooms we find in most schools in our country are not sitting arrangements that can provoke learning. There's so much of, one person is in front, standing there and pretending to be the expert and knowing everything and telling the rest of the crowd who all sit, opposite him, or her, listening. That's not where the world is. We need to provide better infrastructure, design seats and tables like conference, arrangements that will make everybody be able to speak, and then train teachers to be able to to get everybody's idea out and into the public space. But if we continue to use the current lecture method across board, what will happen is that only a few children will continue to benefit from what we're doing, and there will not be an insufficient number to give us the critical mass that will move Nigeria, in an accelerated manner towards the development milestones that we are desiring to accomplish.
All right, interesting. Now let's look at the role of research and data. Your background as a researcher will also be needed here. Now, you have a situation in Nigeria when it comes to national database. The issue of being centralized has been a challenge over the years. Now, how do we change this narrative when it comes to implementing this integration between these principles and academic curriculum when it comes to the issue of data and the right to research? Do we even have the data, the right data, to drive this initiative? And if we don't, what will be the starting point for us to get the right data, the right research, like you talked about projects? Perhaps students you embark on, even teachers and even those who are in the four walls of the universities, to see how they can drive this process. Give us a picture of the kind of data and the kind of research, or the kind of institutional kind of research that should trade this kind of development for us to be able to get to a level in Nigeria where we can say, hey, we'll have the right data to drive this initiative.
Well, you all the time you hear about the National Bureau of Statistics. So some effort is being made through them to collect data from virtually every segment of society, and then from time to time roll it out, disseminate it to stakeholders who probably will have need to work with such data to move society forward. But we shouldn't begin and end there, because they do not constitute even up to 1% of society, and in terms of where things must happen properly. So we need to create a system that enables all the stakeholders work together and then contribute data to a common pool that all of us will also be able to have access to. And for a long time, for example, we have been trying to do things with respect to our national identity, which the National Identity Management Commission still pretends. We talk about the bank verification number and those kinds of things, but we still seem to continue to struggle with respect to being able to press one button and we have access to all the data we're looking for, as researchers and as individuals who need to run businesses to take appropriate decisions. We haven't still been able to get our acts together in that respect. So again, we have to go back to the need for training. I think that where we have the missing link is the fact that the people who are making this, who are making these things happen, don't have appropriate knowledge, don't have the right skills, don't have the right values. As most times, when Nigerians get opportunity to occupy sensitive positions in the public space, they think more of how much money they can make from those kinds of spaces, rather than the opportunity God has given them to help society to move forward. So we need to retrain our people to understand that leadership is everything. The society rises and falls on the quality of leadership that you find within it. We can't do better than the quality of our leaders, and we must get that right. So sometimes I hear people think that followers can drive society, but that's not true. We don't have evidence that supports that. So we need to train all the stakeholders, starting from those who make the policies. For example, the president, the members of cabinet, who will come out and say, this is the direction in which Nigeria is moving, and then all of us will listen. And once we start getting it right at that level, then things will begin to work well for us. And let's recognize the indispensable place of research in making society move forward. You can't change things you haven't understood, and it is research that will help you to understand what the problems are and probably point in the directions that you can find the solutions. But at the moment, we don't have enough incentives that go to researchers that make them abandon chasing money and focus on how to help society to generate the data which we can use happen positively for all of us. So if we incentivize researchers and by way of paying them well so that they don't continue to get distracted by the need to put money on the table for their families. The same way you will want to incentivize medical doctors and other critical professionals to help society to move forward. That's the same thing you have to do to researchers so that they can stay and generate the data we need, which other stakeholders in the industry can help to disseminate, and that way we'll start moving forward.
All right, now let's look at another critical issue which has to do with financing, has to do with funds, where you need to implement any project or anything that has to do with change. You can be rest assured that funds are required. You're aware that the United Nations make allocations to several projects, nationwide as regards community projects that has to do with these SDG goals. Now, talking about financing, starting from the United Nations itself, don't you think it is high time these funds are redirected towards this integration rather than rating them to some of those projects? You're aware that some of those projects over time, they are not being supervised, and then when it comes to the state of those projects, they are just lying fallow there and over. Some of these projects or some of these facilities, they get weakened over time. Now, talking about the right funding, starting from the United Nations, don't you think it is high time these funds are redirected towards this integration as being advocated by some stakeholders? That's the starting point. Then what will be the initiative or the right framework to attract the right investment into this initiative? You are aware that school owners, they will need to spend money to buy materials, to buy, to pay teachers, and to even integrate this initiative, which will inform changes as regards academic curriculum. So when you talk about change, the price to pay has to do with the issue of financing. So my question is, how do we attract the right financing to drive this initiative, starting from the United Nations to school owners and even to parents?
Well, for the United Nations, the information we have for them is that they trust government agencies and officials too much, especially in this part of the world. The assumption is that because they are big establishments and they operate under the aegis of government, that they are omniscient, they understand the challenges of society, and that they can be trusted to help make things happen. But our experience and the data at our disposal do not prove that they have been making the right judgments in trusting government agencies to be the only drivers of most of the projects they like to do in the developing world. They need to trust them less and trust civil society more. But even when it comes to civil society, we must also be sure that we don't continue to patronize only those who have always patronized. We have to scrutinize the people who present themselves as individuals and groups that can help society to move forward, and be sure that they have the right credentials in terms of accomplishments and character that will make us trust them and give them money to do things on behalf of the world. And so, having said that, as it concerns the United Nations, we must also recognize that for government at our own, at national level and at state and local government levels, we must prioritize what we are discussing and ensure that we start, for example, doing as much as 20% in terms of federal budget allocation to education, so that we can create the awareness and develop the skills, the knowledge, the values, the habits, the right attitudes that will make us move in the direction that we desire to move in. But currently, that's not where we are. But we can fund better, we can allocate more money, and again, put systems in place that will guarantee accountability, so that it's not when people see more money coming into the space, they jump in there and think that it's their own turn, to take care of their families. So we need to have a system in place that will ensure that as more money is coming from across the world and from various levels of government, that money will be accounted for and utilized essentially for pursuing and accomplishing the goals that we have been discussing since we started this conversation.
All right, I was expecting you to touch the second part of the question, which is the role of school owners and parents here when it comes to financing. And also, let's also look at the possibility of adopting this change. What kind of obligation are you expecting from school owners, from parents, for this initiative to see the light of the day?
Well, school owners, especially those in the private sector, have to be helped to understand the indispensable role they also play in the education system and in helping society to move forward. But again, we must recognize that it's not easy for them to run their schools, especially in the kind of economy we are running now. So if we see education as an investment and not as a cost, then the government, once they have recognize these schools as having what it takes to make contributions towards the education of our children, they should assist them with some level of funding. That's what we find in some societies. In places like Finland, Norway, and Sweden, they do have private schools, but those private schools also get some funding from government, which helps them to do some work that the ordinary would not be able to do if they were to rely solely on their own internally generated revenue, which will never be enough because education is a social good. If you price education in line with what you need to do to make the kind of profit you would want your money to produce for you, then you can be very sure that you won't pay attention to what will guarantee a better society for all of us, especially as it concerns tomorrow, because the average business person thinks about, surviving as a business and making profit because he has, a multitude of opportunities that come his way every day and to which he can divert his resources. So government should be involved in funding a lot of the things we do in the education space. That's the only way you can get school owners to pay the kind of attention we want them to pay to these issues we're discussing. And parents, when they pay school fees, they should recognize that they are not only paying school fees to get their children to acquire certificates, they are also helping the school system to run in ways that will guarantee our tomorrow. And that tomorrow will certainly come. A lot of the times we just assume that, where we are is where we're going to continue to be. But changes will continue to happen. Technology will continue to disrupt a lot of things that we're experiencing today, and more problems are on the way. But those problems are not going to consume us if we think properly, if we collaborate with school owners, with other stakeholders, including relevant government agencies, to fund the education system. So parents, I employ them to do more than they are doing now. But I also recognize that in the current economic situation in our country, it's not quite easy for parents. But despite that, they should continue to demonstrate resilience and cooperate with other stakeholders in the industry to ensure that we give our children the kind of education that will make them play their roles well, so that we can have a good society, not only for today, but also for the future.
All right, this conversation will not be holistic if we don't make reference to examples in other climes, in other universities who have also implemented this initiative. Let's look at their success story. Are there universities you can make references to or countries who have implemented this initiative? Perhaps Nigeria could also learn from their success story or the failure they've recorded. Are there examples, and what are the lessons for Nigeria? Talking about the implementation of this initiative and integration. Are there examples you can make reference to? And then the success story, perhaps the lessons for Nigeria as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I do research in the Scandinavia, in countries, such as Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And they are excellent examples regarding how the future can be taken care of. Norway has sovereign national fund, which ensures that the money they earn from their oil and other sources get reserved. A significant fraction of it is reserved for taking care of the future. So that's a good example. And if you go to Norway and you move from Norway to any other Western country, for example, most of the countries we like to go to as Nigerians because we don't know about the Scandinavian region. You'll be wondering why people don't talk about those kinds of countries all the time, because those places come across as heaven on earth, really. Everything seems to work in those places. And as a researcher in those regions, I tell you that they don't joke with the environment. They don't joke with sustainability issues. They have whole departments that are adequately funded and staffed with brilliant, the best of the brains in their countries. They make sure that those kinds of people are the ones they use to handle things that have to do with the environment, with governance and generating ideas and principles, and of course with sustainability. And they fund them well, to the tune of millions of dollars, annually, because they know that the future will come and that there's important need for us to take care of that future. So if you get into their classrooms, you also see that everything is designed to reflect the importance they place on both the present and the future. Earlier I was mentioning to you that one of the challenges we have had in our education space here is the fact that our classrooms, and school buildings are designed in ways that if you go into a typical school in Lagos or Port Harcourt or Abuja, in spite of our best intentions, what you find is that about 90% of the school space is made up of brick and mortar. That's not what you find in these kinds of places I'm discussing. If you go to Finland, the opposite is the case. The entire school space, when you divide it and allocate it to different things that are happening there, you find that as much as about 70% of the school space is just natural environment. And what you find will be trees, will be even mountains and hills and ponds. They don't destroy those natural phenomena, and even they even allow other members of the ecosystem to cohabit with the human beings who operate in the school. So you find monkeys even in their school, within the school premises. That way, children see these things, and you don't have to preach those things to them. And interestingly, the way the world works is the fact that if a monkey, lives with human beings for a long time, a monkey begins to, accept human beings as part and parcel of an environment and will no longer be afraid of them and will not harm them. And children can play with them, squirrels and those kinds of things. So those are good models to copy. I relate very well with my colleagues at the University of Helsinki in Finland, and we do some things together. And I tell you that they train teachers differently. They make sure that the training of teachers emphasizes these issues we have put on the table this morning. And when those teachers go to their classrooms and to the schools that they work for, they do much better things compared to what you find in this part of the world. So we haven't been exposing our professors of education and teachers in our classrooms to those clients. I think it would be a smart thing to do, to start organizing trips to those kinds of places, the Scandinavia, Denmark, Iceland, Sweden, Finland, and Norway. If we are able to do that, things will get better for us.
Since our spotlight is on the education sector this morning, let's seize the opportunity to revisit the criticism or the issues around the academic curriculum in Nigeria. Now, there's been this observation or concern about the framework for the academic curriculum in Nigeria, the disparity or the synergy that should exist between the town and gown is missing. Now, what's your observation as a critical stakeholder who has been following trends of things in that sector as regards academic curriculum in Nigeria? What are the loopholes, according to your observation, that you found over the years in the course of your research? What are some of these loopholes? What are some of the missing links when it comes to the framework as regards academic curriculum in Nigeria and the kind of synergy that should exist between the town and the gown? Please talk to us.
Yeah, there's a big problem in that regard. The people who design our curriculum are paying lip service to getting the town and the gown to talk. So employers are not effectively involved in helping us to design the kind of curriculum that we should use to train our children. So some people sit down in government offices and pretend to be experts who know everything, and so they come up with these ideas and put them in documents and disseminate them, calling them school curricula, calling them scheme of work, calling them syllabi, which schools and examination bodies use to orchestrate what they understand to be education, which falls short most of the time. And so I'm not very impressed with the quality of work that we do in that regard as a people. And there's an emergency regarding the curriculum we're using to train our children. You should be aware by now that there's so much movement towards every school becoming an international school. And what that gives you now is the fact that we're running, many schools are running only, Canadian, curriculum in Nigeria, American curriculum in Nigeria, and British curriculum. So when you do that, what you are doing is to train our children to understand the problems of the Western world and not be familiar with our own challenges. And so the solutions that they are also picking up from classrooms are solutions that are probably more appropriate to the Western environments and not to the sub-Saharan Africa, which is where our children are going to spend most of their lives, in spite of the seeming globalization and the fact that we have become one village globally. But the truth remains the fact that culturally we are different from people in America and from people in Britain and from people in Canada. And physically we're also different, even in terms of the kind of food that we produce and the kind of things that grow on our soil. And so our children are not, being helped through the curriculum we are using to train them to appreciate the peculiar challenges of our environment and what they should be doing by way of engaging in inquiries and projects to provide profound solutions to those kinds of problems. So you are right to be suspecting that we are not doing the right thing. We are truly not doing the right thing. Even the subjects like history and even research should be made very popular across board. Children should start learning how to do research from kindergarten, and we should truly promote history as a very important subject in the school system, because it's only when you understand where you're coming from that you can look for probably the reasons why and find the reasons why you are not doing well, and then start thinking about what you can do differently to be able to move faster towards development. Currently, history is not a popular subject because we haven't promoted it the way we should promote it, and maybe more seriously, I think it has a lot to do with the politics we are also using it to play in the case of Nigeria. So our development and sustainability of our society should be prioritized over the politics that politicians use our curriculum to play. And so that's the way to look at it, Femi. We are not sitting where we should be sitting curriculum-wise. We are training our children using ideas that are more appropriate to be promoted in the Western world. We haven't started emphasizing our kind of challenges and how we can, walk through them to get to where we should be.
All right, what a way to wrap up this conversation. Your submissions are quite noted. And when it comes to issues like this, your submissions are quite critical, which is why we had to seek after you to get this statement and this intervention from you. Dr. Peter Ogudoro, we must thank you for your time, your thought, and creating time out of your busy schedule to have this conversation with us this morning. Let's hope that with the right suggestions that you've made, the adoption of this framework will be done shortly, and then the education system in Nigeria will be better for it. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts on LXing this morning.
It has been my pleasure. Do have a great day.
In case you miss this conversation, you have no cause to worry. You can do a catch-up on our YouTube channel at Soup News TV. Don't forget, this conversation continues on our social media platforms. And as Early Exchange will always get bigger and better. Your award-winning program returns tomorrow. And this is where we draw the curtain. This is our offering for today. Thanks for watching. I am Femi Ayodele. I'll see you tomorrow.